Welcome everybody. Welcome to the show. Our first comment is off a reformer, Marcus there. But Reform are doing massively well in the polls, and one of the major polls has put them equal with Labour. Obviously, there's a lot of issues around it all and all that lot, but it's changing the absolute dynamics of voting. And when Pat first approached me about the party, this is something that he predicted would happen. Not particularly because of Reform, but because people are changing the vote and things are going different. And I swear, Pat said that. I agreed with him, and the time has come. This is why we started the party up. This is why we want to run in elections. This is why, right now, the amount of independents and small local political parties similar to ours has risen thousands of percent, and people just aren't seeing it. When you see the elections, all you see is a top lot, the blue, the red, and the green. That's all you see, but they don't show you the bottom section. You've got to really look into it. And I've covered by-elections, normal elections, my own elections for the past 5 years, and I know what I'm talking about. Simple as. And Paul wanted to do, will Reform save Great Britain? Maybe, maybe not, but it's a start. It's a start. And people are voting different. Like I said, with the power of Reform and the Workers' Party, you've absolutely decimated the Labour vote in North Manchester. It's clearly, you can see it there. You can look up all the voting figures and all that. They've absolutely decimated it. The next election, there's a possibility that 3 Labour major hitters, that's Deborah Abrams, Jim McMahon, and Angela Rayner, one of them could lose their seat, and hopefully it's going to be Angela Rayner. We are at some fiery times in this country. I know there's a lot going on, but it's all for the positive. But Pat, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Welcome to the show, everyone, all the viewers, National Housing Party, United Kingdom. Yeah, I mean, I've got quite a long list to reel off here of my observations around Reform UK. And I personally don't think that they should be supported that much. Obviously, it's a welcome change to the political system. But I fear if Reform were to get into power, it's going to be much of the same of what we've had. I mean, the first thing which is really important is they're not going to stop permanent settlement immigration, and they're going to continue to give out passports to foreigners, UK passports. And this is what they keep saying they're going to reduce immigration, and this is what the Tories have been trying to do for 14 years. And it's uncontrollable. It's out of control. And the only way to deal with it, in my opinion, and a lot of other smaller parties who agree with us, is we need to completely stop permanent settlement immigration and give temporary work permits for very skilled things that we can't cover ourselves. But obviously, we need to train our own people. The other really important thing is they are not campaigning to stop accepting refugees. In 2024, 100,000 people claimed asylum in the UK and were granted refugee status. Only 30,000 of them came in at Dover, and Reform UK are only talking about Dover. So at Dover, they're not even going to criminalise people for what they say are illegal entry into our country. They keep saying they're going to pick them up and take them back. That's fine. Obviously, we want them to do that, but you need to have a deterrent, and they're not talking about a deterrent. And the reason they're not talking about a deterrent is because they're trying to protect the United Nations Refugee Convention. They're scared of being called the anti-Semitism label, because it will all lead back to World War II, and that's why that convention was created. So they're basically protecting something which is the problem. And we need a deterrent, and it's in our manifesto, in our policies. We've got a full policy, a long-term plan to deal with the crisis at Dover. We need a punishment for once we've left the Refugee Convention. We need a punishment for entering illegally. You know, at the end of the day, Reform UK are part of the mainstream. They're part of the mainstream media on GB News. Yeah. GB News will not allow any. They won't allow any anyone on their channel like from parties like ours. But at the same time, they'll let Peter Tatchell on there and Benjamin Butterworth. They're just two far left examples of who GB News have on regularly, but they won't have anyone on like British Democrats or National Housing Party. So they're part of the mainstream. They're never going to ban foreign ownership of property in this country, property and land. Our country's being bought up by foreign billionaires from all around the world. They're a politically correct party. They've expelled many people from their party. You know, they got rid of Ben Habib. He was seen as too hardline for them. They're also, you know, a lot of people don't realise this. Reform UK are part of the anti-white agenda. And the reason they're part of the anti-white agenda is because they're not campaigning, like, for example, the British National Party. Farage and many people in Reform would say, oh, the BNP would an R word, because they were fighting for a white British identity to keep it legal to legally have white British group identity officially recognised, like as in a political party or an organisation. And now Reform went along with a system to ban it and basically called anyone the R word who wanted to do that. That is the anti-white agenda. So, you know, they're taking in a lot of ex-Tories from the Tory party. These Tories have destroyed our country. They're willing to take ex-Labour as well. And recently someone resigned from Reform because they basically, Reform prioritised these ex-Tories coming in and removed some of the grassroots Reform candidates. Farage is on record saying he will not deport illegal immigrants. It's in our policy. There's around 2 million illegals in this country. They need to be deported. Most of their leadership are multimillionaires. Rupert Lowe, Farage, Richard Tice. They're an elite club, basically. The trans ideology, they only speak out about children transitioning. And, you know, everyone with a brain cell knows that it should be illegal for a doctor to chop someone's healthy body parts off. And that is our policy. The COVID vaccine debacle, when that broke, Reform were right in with the establishment. They was even proposing to make Tony Blair the vaccine czar. And they were even saying that people should be sacked from the health service if they didn't get the vaccine. This is all on record. They're not openly promoting Christianity, and that trans thing kind of proves that. You know, Farage is also on record saying that Israel have a right to stop immigration to protect their ethnic identity and preserve Israel and keep it a majority for Jewish people. But when asked about the white British people of the UK, he said he didn't care. So also they are a cancel culture party. Most of us on this panel now are banned from joining Reform for the crime of trying to save our country in a civilized and democratic way. You know, they're not willing to work with, for example, UKIP. You know, they're just completely demonising any other smaller party. So not willing to work with any other right-wing party. So in other words, you know, with the cancel culture of banning people from joining them, they are dividing the right. You know, and also, I don't think we should be promoting them, because the danger is Reform are just going to wipe out all the smaller parties, and Reform are just going to become the establishment. They're pro-NATO. Like even the last few days, they're saying, "Oh, Ukraine should join NATO," and this is what caused the problem in Ukraine. So
let's talk about some of those points, Pat.
Yeah,
I think first, before we get into their policy agenda,
one more thing, just one more thing on my list. When Donald Trump was in his first term, the ISIS problem in the Middle East was really bad, and there were literally ISIS attacks happening on the American mainland. And Donald Trump said, right, I'm going to ban immigration from Syria, Iraq, Somalia, and one or two other countries in the Middle East. And Farage turned his back on him. And, you know, Farage is also known to turn his back on right-wing parties in the European Union. He refused to join in the group with Marine Le Pen and AfD. So this guy is not what people think he is, and reform are not going to be the solution to our country. So I don't think they should be promoted, personally.
Yeah, well, we're faced with a situation now where reform, just before the general election, a few months before, they had maybe 20,000 members. They've now hit 220,000 members. This is unprecedented for a party to expand so quickly. Obviously, they're much, much bigger than the Tories now in terms of membership. They're almost equal with Labour. And this will allow them to have a huge presence in every constituency in this country, to have teams to operate and to campaign. But it's not only that their membership has exploded, the amount of money going into the party has exploded. Whereas before the general election, they were picking up thousands there. Now they're picking up millions. So they've got a central office now in Millbank in London. Tucker Carlson's son is working for them. They've got a lot of professional people working for them now. So they're a serious outfit. They're not a Mickey Mouse outfit on the margin of politics. They are now in the mainstream. They're bigger than the Tories, and they're not as big as Labour yet, but they're getting close to Labour. So they're going to be a serious political force. And it's not only the votes that the membership that is exploded and the amount of money they've got, but also their percentage in the opinion polls. John said they were equal with Labour. The last two polls I've seen, they're actually ahead of Labour and the Tories. And this, so they've come from nowhere. I mean, 3 months before the general election, they were a no-hoper party. And now they're in pole position. This is an incredible transformation. This is a political phenomenon. And this is going to transform the landscape in Britain, because the question remains, what impact will they have on the Tory party and the Labour Party and the Lib Dems? Are these parties now going to be pushed to the side, and reform are going to set the agenda? Now, they've also started standing in by-election after by-election in council seats up and down the country, whether it's Tory Norfolk or Labour St Helens. Now, Labour St Helens, nobody wins in Labour St Helens except Labour. They win with 2/3 of the vote, normally. I mean, when I was in the BNP, we campaigned there and we get a reasonable vote. We get 300, 400, 500 votes, but we got nowhere near Labour. Labour will get 2,000 at every local council constituency. Reform stood in St Helens against Labour and beat Labour. It was a shock. It was a shock on Merseyside. And people realised just how attractive this party has become. Now, recently they stood in Norfolk, I think it was last Thursday, a Tory stronghold. The Tories had 70% of the vote in this council seat. Reform overturned the Tory majority and won more than 50% of the vote. Again, it's totally unprecedented. So their impact is exceptional. Why are they making this impact? Well, obviously, Nigel Farage, for a lot of Middle England, is a very attractive figure. Not only did he lead the campaign for the referendum, but he actually won the referendum. And then when the Tories tried to scupper the whole Brexit, agenda process, he managed to destroy the Tories again. He created a second party called Brexit and won the European elections. So whether you like him or not, Nigel Farage is electoral gold dust. He wins elections. He won the referendum. He won the European election with Brexit. He won the European election with UKIP. And now he's winning election after election in local councils. So this is a serious party. This is going places. The question is, what is really their agenda? What do they want to happen in Britain? And the big issue is this: can they heal broken Britain? Because Britain is broken. You talk about our Christian heritage, it's been cast aside. You talk about our family structures, it's been broken. You talk about our immigration control, it's over. The country's been flooded with, maybe 25 million immigrants now. It's incredible. The demographic transformation of Britain is incredible, and it's happening at a faster rate now than ever. City after city, the British, the indigenous British are becoming a minority. And within that, we've got an economic crisis unfolding now. We've got huge debt. We've got no growth in the economy. Labour say they're a party of growth. There is no growth. It's a joke. So, and this is impacting people, people's standard of living, people's quality of life. And you talk about the NHS, you can talk about education, you can talk about the two-tier justice system. The standard of life for ordinary Britons is falling, and people are conscious of that. People are very uneasy about what's happening in Britain. They know now we live in a broken society, and they want hope. They want something which is going to transform this and take us in a different direction. We've hit the rocks now, and we're sinking. And someone's got to pull us out, and they've got to turn the boat around. And there's only one vehicle now which is suggested an alternative strategy. Now, what will Reform do if they achieve power? Now, the first question is, will they achieve power? I mean, even if they're leading in the polls, they're not likely to win a majority in the House of Parliament. That would be an incredible feat to win a majority. If they can increase from 4 to 100 seats, that would be an incredible feat. We've just seen the AfD in Germany, the impact they had, but they're still in opposition. If they become the largest party in Parliament, they'll have to form a coalition, probably with the Tories. Right-wing Tories could break off and join them in the coalition. But I actually think it's much more likely that the Tories will form a coalition with Labour and the Lib Dems. So it's a really uphill battle to get a majority in Parliament, even if they're the most popular party. But it's a possibility it can happen. And then you talk about putting policies into action. They've got to win votes in the House of Commons. And once they get any legislation through, it then goes to the House of Lords for scrutiny. They've got to win votes in the House of Lords. Reform has no representation in the House of Lords. So they're going to have to make a deal with the Tories in the House of Lords to get anything through. You talk about leaving international treaties, you talk about overturning laws. It's a very difficult process in the British system. They'd have to do something in the House of Lords. They might have to create hundreds of lords. But beyond that, they would face opposition in the courts. The judiciary is very left-wing in this country. We're seeing what we're seeing in America, right? Trump is incredibly strong in America, and yet his agenda is facing attacks all the time. But Trump has got such a stronghold now in America, he can push through that. This is Reform's great hope, that America, the Republican Party, we talked about is Tucker Carlson's son being involved with Reform. The American Republican Party and the Trump administration will support a Reform government. That's their only hope, because otherwise they will be isolated very quickly by the establishment. We have a deep state in this country, a very, very deep state, much deeper than America. The NHS is just a left-wing racket. The education system is a left-wing racket. The judiciary is a left-wing racket. The civil service, who will have to put any agenda that Reform have into practice, is now totally controlled, not just by the left, but by ethnic minorities. And they will, at every turn, scupper anything that Reform attempts to do. So Reform will have to come in with a revolutionary edge. They're going to have to really, it's going to be a battle to save Britain. Now, to achieve victory in that, this is where Steve Bannon criticises Reform. He said they're going to need street dogs. They're going to need foot soldiers, because it's not only the deep state that will try and scupper Reform at every turn. The left, I mean, Pat's talked about Reform being like sort of politically correct. The left is saying that Reform is racist, the R word. They're saying that Reform is fascist, and they'll use that. And they've already started attacking Reform meetings. I mean, Reform's best policy is to do what Donald Trump did. We're standing for common sense. Do the political revolution once you get power. Once you get power, you've got other options and you can actually bring another agenda to the fore. But before any general election, Reform's best policy is to dilute their policies and make them palatable. They can't be a radical right-wing party because that means that all the members will be blacklisted. They won't be able to work in public sector jobs. They'll find hostility from the police, the state, now. So Reform have got to play a softly approach. The question is, are they an authentically radical party? Are they like Trump? Trump was a member of the Reform Party in America. This was Ross Perot's party. This is the model that Farage has taken up. This is all games at this point now. The strategic games that they're playing, but there's big stakes in this. And Reform are the only, Reform are the party that's reshaping the whole agenda. John, do you want to say something?
Yeah. Before we go on to Stuart, thank you for that, Paul. Before we go on to Stuart, I agree with what Pat said, but as I said at the very beginning, the voting thing's changing, and people helping this is Reform, the Workers' Party, independence. This is what we need. And can you read that? We didn't vote because it won't make a difference. Don't matter who you vote for. There's so many more independent councillors in the UK than there ever has been. There's 16 in Oldham. It's unheard of. It's unheard of, and there's 16 in Oldham. So things are changing. I agree with everything that Pat says, but I think it's a vehicle to get us away, to change things, and that's what I believe Reform at. That's what I believe Reform at. I have big issues with them. The biggest issue is the cancel culture. I've met Reform people who support Israel. I don't personally, but it's up to them if they want to do that. We can tell them everything that's wrong. We can tell them all that, but they're still going to do whatever they're still going to do. But it's a vehicle for change, and things are changing. And as I said, this is what me and Pat discussed in the very beginning. Before Nigel Farage and Reform had 200,000, we said things are going to change, and they are changing. So that's the way that I want to go on it. I'm not going to be fully negative of them when I know it's a vehicle used for change. But let's get to Stuart. Stuart, what do you think? Are Reform going to save the United Kingdom, or are they a vehicle for change?
Good evening, everybody. Sorry for being a little bit late. I was making a cup of tea. I've got the gist of the conversation. My worry is, Klaus Schwab said we need to make an angrier world to bring in the next industrial next revolution, the Great Reset. Now, my fear is everybody's disillusioned. Massive amounts of people do not vote at all, at any level. To be able to bring in change and get the people behind the change, you need a decent mandate from people. And as Paul was saying, to get a mandate and then push it through the House of Commons, Lords, and then back again and back again, you're going to need a massive, massive change. My worry is with everybody's disillusionment, even if they come out and vote in, are we being dangled that little carrot of, oh, Reform are going to change everything, but are they going to change it enough to get the mandate? I personally don't think so in the 4 or 5 years that they have to try and get into power. The immigration is still being pushed. They're still being paid for by George Soros and stuff, although with US aid being trimmed, shall we say, hopefully that will reduce a bit, because a lot of his money does come through USAID, which is not for aid. It's American interests developments or something like that. I personally have that worry that we'll be given reform. as the only option. Whereas I think to get real change, I go back to what John said, getting lots and lots of people in at local level and then building lots of little independent parties with lots of, hopefully, common sense ideas. That's going to take even more time, but it is changing. And the more we talk, the more that we get different ideas out there. I mean, as a person, when I learn, I'm willing to change. And I'm sure every party out there would be willing to change. But until we all put Britain first, nothing else, Britain, not Ukraine, not the Middle East, not anywhere but Britain. Sort Britain out first. And I'm beginning to think the immigration thing is a bit more than we know. The massive amounts of young men of fighting age, 18 upwards, I personally don't think they should be here if they're single, didn't come here with a family, didn't come here seeking persecution. And reform are definitely not tough enough on that. And my worry is, being they're pro-Israel, they'd quite happily be siphoning money from Israel. I do see that some of our MPs on both sides of the aisle, if you scrutinise it a bit, they're all receiving, or a lot of them are receiving, a few grand, 100 grand, 10 grand from Israel lobbyists. Lobbyists should not be paying for what will end up as favours. That's what lobbyists do, isn't it? Modern lobbyists. So I personally think that it's going to be tough, but I do not think that reform is the answer at the moment. Maybe as time goes on and they gather pace, then they can maybe take on more stringent ideas. And I think possibly that's the only way forward. I think they are changing things, changing the conversation. Everybody out there I know, nobody I know supports Ukraine. Very mixed about Israel, as a lot of people are. But until we get a common consensus for a broad range of ideas, I do not see how things are going to change drastically enough to bring this country back from the brink. You only have to look at our birth rate. Our birth rate, I believe, was last quoted as 1.6. We need 2.1 just to maintain as a society. So the UN immigration is real, replacement migration, whether you want to call it that or not, that is what is happening, and it's being financed, and our government are paying for it, so the taxpayers are paying for it, and nobody will talk about it. I mean, the things I've seen on Doge UK and at Waste UK and the procurement files, it's horrendous. They're throwing away billions. And Reform aren't talking about that. Will they ever talk about that?
Look, hold on, let me just weigh in. I've got a couple of points, sir. £250,000 in a year has been given to Labour and Conservative MPs through the Middle East Forum. I just want to get that in, right? And Marcus, if you're winding Pat up with mentioning Israel a few times, just watch your back, young laddie. I just want to mention we've got nearly 1,000 people on at the moment. A lot of them are off Twitter, 746. I don't know what's going on there. I must have clicked on the right thing, but this is a nationalising party. There's our PayPal. In the description, you can find our website. I will put it in a list in a minute. And we just want you to join the party. Please subscribe to my YouTube and all the other descriptions on our list, please. Just build us up. you know, we're running in local elections and we're doing well because nobody says anything about us. You know what I mean? So we must be doing well. I've been approached by people in Oldham saying I'm definitely council material and keep going on and stuff like that, you know, so we're doing well. I do talk about reform and I've been to some of the conferences, but I've asked them difficult questions and stuff like that. I've asked them about issues that we just talked about, that Pat's just talked about. One of the things is the cancel culture, which is a big thing with me. And I've talked to 3 candidates for members of parliament of reform about this, and I can't repeat the names because they get cancelled and it winds me up, that kind of thing. And you know, they're just too liberal, reform overall. But anyway, Steve, our reform gonna save the United Kingdom?
Well, I think there's one thing we can all agree on for certain, and that's that we want to see the back end of the Lib Lab Con, right? However, I've always looked at reform as sort of soft opposition. May very well be the only opposition, but it is soft opposition in my idea. Like, when I think of the name reform, I think, do they want to reform the country, or is this a reformation of the Tories? Because that's more to where I'm sort of leaning. There's one thing I'll never forgive Richard Tice and Nigel Farage for, and that is when they campaigned like it was an ad read during the COVID pandemic. It really sort of rubbed me up the wrong way. And it seems to me that they were capitulating to like a globalist policy. And that doesn't scream trustworthy to me. It never has. Are they a nationalist party? I'm not sure. Maybe you could class them as like a patriot party, but I do think there's a difference. There's a few things really to look at here. Like, they definitely have the backing of things like GB News, and they're sort of marketed as a reactionary party, and they're good at it, right? They sort of play off of outrage culture, and with the other 2 options being so drastically mental, then people are naturally going to turn to this and go, oh, look, they're speaking for the common man. But then you have things that happen with, like, Richard Tice, where he talks about net zero, but he has a company that's invested in electric cars. And I'm like, right, so you can lie, and you do. And I have, I think, a plethora of worthy criticisms, to say the least. Are they going to change or make a big impact on the country? I'm not sure. What they will do is make an impact on the way people vote. They'll swing a lot of votes away from the Lib Lab Con. What we do have to keep an eye on, though, is their credibility and who exactly they're appeasing, what they're capitulating to. And these are things that people aren't looking at closely enough, in my opinion. Look, they are the alternative because they do have the backing from things like GB News and such. How much, like, I'm never one to look at an alternative and immediately fall head over heels for it just because it's the alternative. I think there's some worthy criticisms to be spoken about. And yeah, that's about it.
I think you've got to look at the fact that reform are in many ways now the British wing of the Trump revolution. I mean, Farage is marketing himself really as the British Trump. But, you know, that Farage, he hasn't got the populist appeal of Trump. He has got a popular appeal, there's no doubt about that. But as Steve Bannon said, when he attacked Tommy Robinson, the Republican Party almost pulled away from Farage because the Republican Party has managed to bring the American working class and the American conservative middle class together. This is the challenge for Farage, really. What's he doing with the British working class? I mean, he's a middle class guy, so people call him a saloon Tory. He went to public school, he went to Dulwich College, he worked in the City of London. He does have the popular touch. He can go into the pub and he can share a pint with the local man. He can have a cigarette. But the issue is this: is the Trump revolution what we need in this country? I mean, this is going to be the British wing of the Trump revolution. There's no doubt about that. And the policies that Trump is now enacting. Now, the most crucial one is the attack on wokeness. And if you listen to Rupert Lowe, who's the MP for Reform in the House of Commons, he constantly attacks the woke agenda. Now, we know that Reform has a mixed past, but you see, in America, there are red states. There's a massive Christian movement. The Republican Party's been taken over by the radical right. In Britain, the globalists and the left-wing state are totally dominant. The Tories have submitted to them. You've got to play within that paradigm. You see, if you can move the paradigm, the Overton window, slightly to the right, he can start to move things. But Britain is so broken now that you can't do that easily. We haven't got this MAGA movement in Britain. I mean, this is one of the things they call Reform, the People's Army. Will it become a real People's Army? I mean, once they have to campaign at local election level, once they mobilise in every constituency, it's got to be the people that mobilise. I mean, you can have a couple at the top, but to get a national movement going, it's got to be a national movement. And this is the test for Reform. Can they become the MAGA army? Can they become the People's Army of Britain? This is going to require millions of people behind it. To push through any agenda for change in Britain, you're going to have a huge army behind you. You're going to have the people behind you. You're going to have to mobilise them. What's left of the British people? And don't forget, I mean, and you talk about the Islamic presence, the Muslims have got huge power in this country. They haven't got it in the States. But in council after council in this country now, they have huge power. To challenge that, you're going to need to, you're either going to have to neutralise that, which I think Farage has tried to do, or you're going to have to mobilise the British people. But eventually all these things are going to come to a head, because the policies that the Lib Lab Con have been pushing now for the past, certainly since Tony Blair, and the Tories turned out to be just a continuation of Tony Blair, these policies don't work. As I say, we've got no economic growth. People's quality of life is declining. People's living standards are under constant pressure. People don't feel comfortable and secure anymore. All the services we use, you go to an NHS hospital, you're waiting behind half of Pakistan and half of Nigeria. It's a joke. We're losing the quality of our services. Our schools are full, and they're full with a lot of kids who don't even speak English. And now they're trying to destroy the public schools. Our system of law and order and our judiciary is now totally bankrupt. It's a two-tier system, and we know that we're being targeted now. The goal of the judicial system in this country now is to engineer social change. And we're seeing this in the Ukraine fiasco, that Starmer and the Europeans have stood against Trump. Now, when we begin to challenge them domestically, they'll stand against the Trump agenda. It's going to have to be an incredible wave to overcome this. But what we have on our side is two things. We're still the majority in this country, and the people who are running it now are not capable of rectifying the problems. They have no solutions. There is no way forward. Europe is in terminal decline. America's starting to write off Europe. So these are the two things in Reform's favour. Now, what we've really got to ask is this question. How can we be a constructive criticism of Reform? How can we be a party that mobilises the population, the people? How can we are a working class party, we're of the people. Reform need us. They need a working class presence ultimately. They can't engineer it like they engineered the Brexit vote to actually take power and use that power effectively to transform Britain. They need the people behind them. They can't manipulate that because the deep state will come against them. That's what scared off the deep state in America. When they saw the size of Trump's rallies, when they saw the number of people committed to the MAGA movement, it made them afraid. It made the deep state afraid. They realized that Trump had sunk deep roots into America, into the population of America, he had become the people's president. And this is the only way reform will ever achieve anything in this country. And they have to realize that it's parties like us who could give them that option. So we have to be constructive in our criticism. We have to say, look, we need to make this agenda more real for people at a local level. We have to address these issues as they arise about education, about health provision, about social security, about the distribution of wealth. I mean, so much of our money is being siphoned off now to finance mass immigration or crazy wars in the Ukraine or this crazy net zero agenda. The money we need desperately now for the working class in this country to have a decent lifestyle is being used on other groups. So there's a battle there. And reform we're going to have to fight. You can only manipulate so far. You can only play the PR game so far. Once you get in power, if you're trying to engineer change, you're going to have a fight on. And they've got to have fighters. This is the point they're going to realize at some stage. They're building a party now, and they don't want to be attacked by the left. But when the left attack them, they actually shut down one of their meetings recently. The left barracked their meetings, and the left will become much more aggressive against reform. And if reform pushes a real reform agenda, the left will mobilize against it. The reform have got to have the people behind them. It's got to become a populist movement. This has got to be a populist revolution. And this is what Elon Musk was saying to Farage as well. Are you up to it? Can you connect with the people? Pat, this is the thing. Can they connect with the people?
Well, I was just about to mention what you just said there, Paul. Elon Musk came out and said that Nigel Farage is not the man. Nigel Farage doesn't come close to Donald Trump, right? I'm not even 100% happy with Donald Trump because of his Zionism, but he is an outstanding politician, which is a breath of fresh air to patriotic people. But as I said in my list of criticisms back in Donald Trump's first term, Donald Trump wanted to ban immigration from countries where there was a problem with terrorism, and he was going to ban immigration, and the whole world turned against him, and Farage turned his back on him. And recently, with the Ukraine crisis, Farage should be backing Donald Trump up 100%, and reform should be backing him. But they've just proved their establishment credentials, in my opinion, by sticking up for Zelensky, saying he's not a dictator, and we got to save NATO, and Ukraine should join NATO, and that kind of says it all to me, really. But going back to can reform succeed and get into power, they've got a long way to go, a very, very long way to go. As I said before, it will be a welcome change, but we've got to be supporting the smaller parties, because reform, not only are they going to destroy the Lib Lab Con, they will also destroy all the smaller parties, the genuine patriotic nationalist parties. And, reform's got a long way to go. People kept on saying, oh, the Liberal Democrats got 80 seats and all this, but Liberal Democrats hold around 2,000 local council seats. Reform UK at this stage only hold about 50 local seats. That's quite an exaggeration. I don't know the true number, but I know it's like maybe 30, under 30. That's all they hold, and they need to be getting thousands of local seats, and they could potentially do that. And we have to wait and see. But people keep saying, they're going to destroy the Lib Lab Con. The Lib Lab Con was falling apart anyway. Where I'm standing, people hate the Lib Lab Con, and it's going to be a problem for me if reform stand in my seat, and it's going to be a problem for John. It's going to be a problem for Steve. It's going to be a problem for Lee Bishop. It's going to be a problem for Ashley, who's standing in rugby this May. Reform are such a well-known figure now. Because of the establishment, they're a household name, because Farage has been more or less accepted by the establishment. So we need to be careful about promoting them. And, I don't think they need any more money. They don't need more donations. They don't need any more support. They're big enough as it is. So, you know, I hope that they toughen up. They keep saying Rupert Lowe's the man, you know, but Rupert Lowe has just been exposed for doing dodgy deals with Rishi Sunak's wife, multi-billion-pound deals. So, you know, we've got to be careful, and I welcome change if it happens, you know, but I don't support them. I wouldn't vote for them. I voted for them in the London elections because I agreed with their traffic policies, but then that was when Farage wasn't the leader. When Farage became leader, I was like, no, I'd never vote for them. I'm banned from their party. You know, we're all, you know, they've banned 100,000 patriots from their party who are trying to save the country. That says it all to me. So
let me just weigh in. Marcus, can you tell us how many local council seats that Reform hold? I'm sure it's less than 50, but a lot less than 50.
There's a lot of Tory defectors coming over. But I mean, it's May elections coming up, and it can all change very quickly.
Say one other thing: what's happening in the Middle East with Israel? You know, we're on the verge of a world war in the Ukraine as well as the Middle East, and you know, Israel have just blocked food, water, and aid going into civilians, which is a war crime, and you know, it's about to kick off World War, and because of our Zionist establishment governments, they're going to support Israel and drag us into it. And this is not really bad news. You know, lots of people are going to be killed, and it's you know, we're on the verge, guys, and we shouldn't be supporting Israel. We shouldn't be supporting Palestine either. But we've got to call out when there's a war crime or not, and what's wrong and what's right.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Pat. I had my doubts. Sorry, somebody's mic mucking about.
Might be yours. I don't know. Carry on talking, Stuart.
Well, I've just turned it off and on again. That seems to work, hopefully. Yeah, I agree with what everybody's saying tonight. Apart from my fear is that this is what we're being given. You know, Labour got a large, well, not that many people voted, but they got the majority because everyone was desperate for change. And then all we got was the darn sight bloody worse. I think I always try and look at it from not so much what they say, from their actions and the outcomes of those actions. I personally feel that the majority of people do not want anything to do with Ukraine anymore. I get a little bit of kickback on that on X and other platforms, but not much. Most people agree. Most people see that Zelensky's a cokehead. Now, if at that level of politician, prime minister or president of that country is doing drugs, how far does that go through our system? And what are they linked to? Where do their finances all come from? Who finances them? That's, again, my worry, because the finances, whatever way you look at it, get control. Like pharmaceutical companies, like the agricultural companies, like BlackRock, who want to come in and buy up all our farmland. That sort of done deal with Starmer. They're going to push all the farmers out of business. What are Reform saying about that? Oh, we don't like it. That's it. But, you know, if I've got to say, if you're a Reform candidate out there and you might be listening to this, you need to toughen up your party. It's not good enough. And it won't get a majority, as Pat says, and as Paul said, in government for a long time. And unless we come up with a better alternative, they're the only alternative. So what are we left with, people? Need to get in at lower level. Lower level will cause a ripple effect. So join the local party, go independent, come up with your own ideas, chuck some ideas at us. Help fund us. You know, the link's up on the screen. Be very helpful. Pays for pamphlets, excuse me, and local campaigns for people. Every little bit will help. I'm sure John's got some more details on that, haven't you, John?
I certainly have. All our money goes on leaflets. We don't spend anything on clothing or travel. All that's done ourselves. And we've had thousands. We must have had over 40,000 leaflets so far, Pat, easy. And we've delivered them a lot of places throughout the country. When I go out, I always take leaflets with me. But yeah, donate to us. Look, when you're voting, look at who you're voting for. If there's an independent, they'll have a phone number, phone them up. If it's not National Housing Party, get for an independent and phone them up. If you're going to phone the Reform person, you tell them what you want. You tell them that you want the borders shut. You tell them you don't want no war in Ukraine and Israel. You want to stay out of it all. This is what you've got to tell the people so that it goes lobbying and it goes to the top and eventually they'll change. But anyway, Reform are a vehicle of change. That's what they are to me. Obviously, Pat's got his issue, but definitely Reform are a vehicle that we can use for change. That's what I'm going to say.
I think if we can now, how do you see it unfolding going forward into the general election? Do you think Reform will get, how many seats do you think they'll win?
I think they'll win quite a few seats. And they're gonna, well, in the local elections, I think they're gonna do really well. But it's the member of parliament elections and by-elections that they possibly will do good. Runcorn doesn't look like Runcorn are going to have a by-election now because that Mike's been let out of jail, so he's not even done any jail time. But Reform comes second there, but they only took the Tory vote. They still got, I think, Labour twice as many votes as what Reform got. So I don't think that seat would have been definitely theirs. It wouldn't have been. I think it's...
Well, I think there, John, which put them neck and neck with Labour. I think we're underestimating the impact of Reform. People are totally disillusioned with this Labour government. So Labour could go down to under 30%. I mean, they could lose possibly 200 seats at the next general election. The Tories, I mean, Kemi Badenoch, nobody wants to know what she's got to say. It doesn't matter how much they promote her. She's not a leader. And so the Tories are committing suicide. The Lib Dems just full of garbage. They're pro-Ukraine, pro-EU, pro-immigration. They're a waste of space. So it's an open goal, really. I mean, all Reform has to do, this is the thing about Reform, they don't really have to be that radical. They can be just be realistic, play it cool, talk about common sense. You do the revolution once you get in power. This is the essence of radical politics. You don't scare off anybody before an election. You build up the widest constituency you can. This is what Trump did. Trump denied that he was going to be radical in power, but as soon as he got power, he moved up a gear. Now, what I want to ask Steve Wild is this. What's happening in America now? We've had a month of Trump. We've had a revolution. Is Reform going to bring that revolution to Britain? Because that's obviously what they want to achieve. What do you think, Steve?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, actually, because whilst Trump has been seen to be doing these immediate changes, which are great and stuff, but I mean, if the bar is set at saying that there's two genders, then that just shows how far gone society is in the first place. These are sort of silly issues, but he's making massive waves in regards to the like deportations and stuff. There is one thing that really, really worries me and concerns me. Now, I've noticed in the chat there's a lot of talk about Zionism going on. Let me make something very clear, right? Recently, Trump has just come back from a rabbinic conference of the Sanhedrin. If you don't know who the Sanhedrin are, they are the Pharisees that sentenced Jesus Christ to death. And he signed off something called the Noahide laws. And if you look into what the Noahide laws are, it's basically very oppressive against Christians in Israel. So they're not our friends. I don't support Zionism, and that's that for me. Now, when it comes to reform, they're not hard enough on things like demographics. They also have a worrying lobbyist backing from the likes of Israel, who I am not allowed to support because of my Christian faith.
I think we can't make Israel central to what's happening in Britain. We know it has an impact, and we know their influence can be negative. But, I mean, Trump has, I mean, there's a guy who stopped the mass immigration in America across the border, who's leading a campaign to tighten the border and to deport illegals, is Stephen Miller, himself is Jewish, you know. Now, we need to stop mass immigration drastically because we're being overwhelmed, we're being flooded. The demographic change is so dramatic in this country. We need to stop it. We need to take steps to change that. But we've got another possibly 4 years of this Labour government. And we saw what impact Biden had on the states. Now, he just opened the border and he just flooded in. I mean, reform have got to be realistic. They're batting on a very sticky wicket, but it's moving in their favour, without a doubt, because the whole globalist agenda is crumbling. And the immigration is the big sticking point, but also the cultural changes in society. I think reform had to have this cancel culture to get any sort of foothold in the mainstream. Once the mainstream starts to crumble, it's up to reform whether they want to be more radical. This is the thing. Have they got any radicalism within them? And who's going to trigger off this radicalism? You see, in America, you have these think tanks which provide the policies which the Trump administration can then put into effect to radically change America. In a sense, we have to become a think tank. We have to have the radical policies, and we can say to reform, look, you've got to move further on that agenda. You've got to end this cancel culture. You've got to embrace a much more radical platform about immigration and refugees. But that can only be effective once they have power. I mean, to say to them this in opposition is just it's just a sound and fury. We need them to be in power in order and be willing to listen to more radical ideas. This is what the right, the smaller local forces on the right in America have achieved with the Trump revolution. They have shaped the ideology of Trump. They've shaped the policies. You see, if reform are going into the election policy light, once they get power, in order to effect change and to deal with the issues, they're going to have heavier policies, real policies. And we're the only people who are prepared to articulate those real policies. I mean, Pat does it very well. But it's our role is really to articulate these policies. We've got a media platform. As Elon Musk says, we're the media now. And where else are these ideas coming from? I mean, Pat introduced this idea of we had to leave the United Nations 1951 Refugee Convention. And that went through the body politic. That's the impact of creating a policy, and then people listen to it and they think this is what is required. We've got to, if reform don't want to be thinking, if they want to be really just try and appeal to everybody, someone's going to have to do the hard thinking on the right. Someone's going to have to face the issues that reform are going to have to deal with. How are they going to deal with the demographic transformation in this country? Do they want to save the British people? How are they going to save our culture? How are they going to revive our institutions? How are they going to deal with the House of Lords? What are we going to do with the judiciary? What changes do we need to the NHS? Because we need radical change in the NHS. No one's prepared to touch that. But the NHS has now become a left-wing fiefdom. It's now woke central, and they're wasting billions of taxpayers' money on the woke agenda. Someone has to speak that up and face it, you know. Education in this country, we need a new curriculum, which, again, we are a Christian party. And this is a massive impact we can have on the agenda, Christian agenda, traditional morality, a traditional party. This is one of the forces of Europe, traditionalism. Go on, Stu.
Yeah.
I was just going to say about the NHS. I don't know if a lot of people know it, but every single NHS trust in the country has on its board a member from one of two American private medical companies. So they push agendas that are ruining the NHS. They're pushing the DEI agenda. You know, we're paying millions for that on the NHS to have lots of people in the hospital that just check that, oh, we haven't upset you in some way, have we? Isn't that what unions used to do? To find out if the workforce is happy? You have a union rep. You don't have half a dozen DEI initiatives around each ward of the hospital with people checking that you're all being inclusive and you're not getting people's 72 genders wrong. We need common sense, and getting that sort of thing out of our NHS is imperative. The foreign influence throughout, you could say it's in the NHS, but the foreign influence through every company that was privatised. You look at every company that's privatised in the company, they are foreign owned and they suck the money out.
Let me weigh in. Grifting is a crime. I don't know who you are, but I think you're just talking a load of bollocks, really. I've got issues with unregistered faith schools, whether they're Jewish or Islamic, and I've got issues with donations from the Middle East Forum going to Labour and Conservative MPs. That's my issue with anything, and I don't believe we should be in war or anything like that. So just get your predictions right. You said a load of bullshit tonight. It's a good job I don't know you anyway, but you just said a load of bullshit. But thank you for watching. Thank you, everyone, for watching. It's been quite a bit of a discussion tonight. A vehicle of change, that's what I say. Paul sort of like similar on that end. Pat doesn't want to say that, but I think it's definitely a vehicle for change. And again, we only have to look at statistics and the figures of people voting differently, which is fantastic. When reform do break up, I think that'll be the catalyst to starting more independents, more hyper-local political parties, similar like to ours. I think that's going to be a big catalyst for it all. And when it gets to that picture behind me will be worth a million words.
Let me just say one last thing, John. Yeah, so I think reform could do a lot more. They could say a lot more stuff like campaigning to stop accepting refugees. I think that they would get more support if they did things like that. You know, the trans issue, you know, they shouldn't be supporting Israel. They shouldn't be supporting Ukraine, you know. So I feel that they could strengthen their thing. And I don't understand why they're doing, and this is why I'm suspicious about it, because the refugee thing is just obvious. The state of this country, we do not need any more refugees coming here. We've helped enough, and we don't need any more permanent settlement immigration. It's a no-brainer, those two things. But I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us tonight. Steve had some good. Steve's liked in the chat. Obviously, I'm not. You know, anti-Semitic. I don't know what I've said. You know what I mean? And again, if you think that teaching children in the basements of unsafe buildings is okay, then you're a prick. And you don't need to be in this country. You don't need to be voting, right? I do think it's an issue. And obviously, I think donations from anybody is an issue. If you make an issue of Elon Musk supporting reform, then you've got to make an issue of Middle East foreign donations and Islamic donations that come to 2 million in 10 years to 160 members of Parliament of the UK. You've got to have an issue with that. But obviously, nobody's going to have an issue with anything like that. But thank you very much. This is a nationalising party. Join us next week. 1,500 people are viewing, a lot of them on Twitter. Thank you. Guys, follow us in the chat. Subscribe to me YouTube and all our descriptions. God bless you all.